Welcome back to the Taiwan Outlook. Mr. Planche, you are now the Deputy Director of the European Economic and Trade Office here in Taiwan. What's the primary mission of your office here?
Right, the European Economic and Trade Office is the representative office of the European Commission in Taiwan. The European Commission being the executive branch of the European Union, if you want. So our main mission here is to deal with trade negotiation with the Taiwanese government. You probably know that the European Commission represents the whole of the EU in the trade area. So we speak on behalf of the EU. But apart from that mission in trade, we also want to promote ties in the economic, investment, trade sectors. We also have a mission of explaining the EU, making the EU better known to the Taiwanese public, public at large and government authorities. And lastly, we also have a few cooperation programs in which we want to develop better ties, stronger ties between Taiwan and the EU, for example, in the area of higher education and also in the area of research.
Let's start with the economic and trade relations between the two sides. What's the current state of trading and economic relations between Taiwan and the EU?
Taiwan is a big partner for the European Union. It was in 2005, which is the latest available statistics, the 14th largest partner of the European Union. The year before it was the 10th largest partner. There's a tendency for Taiwan to slip a little bit down the list, mainly because more and more of Taiwanese production is relocated to the mainland, to Chinese mainland, so that these products, which used to go directly from Taiwan to the EU, now are exported from China to the EU, even if they're exported by Taiwanese companies. So that's one of the reasons why Taiwan is slipping. The other reason is that we're not totally satisfied with the European exports to Taiwan. We have a big trade deficit with Taiwan. It's not a big problem or a systematic problem for us, but in the long run, it's not very good for a bilateral trade relation if there is a long-running deficit. So we have to find ways to export more to Taiwan so that we keep Taiwan in the list of the 10 biggest trading partners for the EU.
How about investment, the bilateral investment between the two sides?
Well, it's small at the EU scale, but the EU scale is always very big. Still, in Taiwan, the EU investors are now the biggest investors, and we've seen last year a trend in services which we didn't see before. For example, a big bank has been bought in Taiwan by European investors. So for Taiwan, the European investors are starting to become rather big. Now for the European Union, the Taiwanese investors are big in certain areas and certain countries. Taiwanese investors are very present in the electronics sector in, for example, the Czech Republic.
That's right.
Where one Taiwanese company is the 8th biggest Czech company and the 2nd biggest Czech exporter to the rest of the world. So we're starting to see that, but it needs more. I think overall, the Taiwanese investments in Europe are smaller than the Taiwanese investment in Africa. So
why is that, even next to the Africa?
Well, I think that so far the Taiwanese investors or the Taiwanese businesses didn't think that was very useful to be invested in Europe. But now that they grow up market, they start to realize that if you're far away from your market, if you're not present there with a team and with production capacities and with research and development capacities, then you have a difficulty to reach the market. You have difficulty to serve the customers. So they are recently they have started to realize that they need to be there. They need to be in Europe to serve the European clients.
Does your office provide any information or any service in helping Taiwanese investors?
Well, we do provide very general information to the Taiwanese investors. But then if they want more concrete things, they need to go to the representative offices of the different EU countries. And indeed in Taiwan we have 16 member states of the European Union out of the 27 which have an established trade representative office. So they can quite easily go to them, ask questions to these people.
What is the division of labor between your office and other individual EU countries' offices here in Taiwan?
Well, on the trade question, we the European Union, the European Commission, deal with trade negotiation, trade policy, whereas the member states deal with trade promotion. They will try to have better bilateral trade relations with Taiwan. So that's the division of labor. Trade negotiation, trade policy on the one hand, and for the member states of the EU, trade promotion.
How about tourism? We've been seeing a lot of tourism increasing for Chinese people going to Europe and doing business or tourism.
Well, we're quite satisfied with that trend because indeed 2005, once again the latest statistics available, we had 300,000 Taiwanese tourists or visitors at least going to the EU, which is a good number out of a population of 23 million.
That's right.
So we are also very happy to see this increasing. Tourists, business people, and students which is very important, will build the future bilateral relation between the EU and Taiwan. People moving both sides, both ways, will be the ones who will build the future of our bilateral relations. And since we're talking about students, we also have seen a very sharp increase in students, Taiwanese students going to the EU for studies, from something like 3,000 students a year in 10 years ago to now 13,000 a year. So that's a very good trend. And that's a trend that builds the future of our relations.
That's right. And Taiwan also pay attention to our application for the WHO observer status. And what's the EU position on that particular issue?
The EU position was clearly stated in 2004 during the WHA, the World Health Assembly, in the spring of 2004. Then we said, we don't vote in favor of Taiwan becoming a member or an observer of the WHO, but we would like to see Taiwan associated more closely with the work of the WHO. So we've been pushing and we've been advocating more Taiwanese participation to the work of the organization. I think that's important. We've seen quite an improvement in the situation so far, maybe not satisfactory yet, but we're hopeful that this will increase.
But people have been asking, in practice, what does it mean by meaningful participation of Taiwan in the WHO works? Do you provide any criteria or any judgment or evaluation about meaningful participation by Taiwan?
The most important part in the work of the WHO, it's a forum of medical specialists from all over the world who get together, exchange information, and that's the most important. And that's the area where we would like Taiwan to be associated as much as possible. That means, for example, that when the WHO organizes a seminar on such illness, SARS or AIDS or avian flu, it's important that the Taiwanese medical specialists can take part in there and share their experience, listen to the others, be part of the information network in the WHO. That's the idea.
But people have been talking about whether we should do it case by case or we should try to negotiate a package deal for Taiwan's participation in this very important health organization. Do you think that's a possibility for Taiwan to reach some sort of deal with the WHO, with Taiwan's package participation in this organization?
For the time being, what we EU would like to see is a good activity from the part of the WHO Secretariat and its director. And we fully trust the director to make sure that Taiwan indeed participates in the work of the WHO. That's what we want to see. We want concrete results. That's it.
Okay. For Taiwan, we also pay a lot of attention to the situation in China. And in some cases, we are very concerned about the relation between EU and China. And the military relationship is a very important case for us. But Taiwan has been trying to persuade other countries to pay attention to the military force deployed against Taiwan, on the opposite side of Taiwan Strait. How does the EU take on that, your position on the military force used by China, possible use of force against Taiwan?
The EU has a very clear and easy to understand position on the question of Taiwan and the Taiwan Straits and the relation between Taiwan and China. We follow what we call a one China policy, which means that we do not have diplomatic relations with Taiwan. We do not recognize Taiwan diplomatically. That's one. Secondly, we oppose the use of force in the resolution of the cross-strait conflict. And thirdly, we encourage both sides to work together through dialogue to solve the conflict. And that's the basis of the EU position, if you want. You can explain that in different shapes and use different words, but that's really the basis. So indeed, we are very attached to that core idea that force, military force, should not be used in solving the conflict across the Taiwan Strait.
But some people criticize the European Union countries for over-implementing the so-called One China policy. For instance, there are a lot of bans on the Taiwanese officials visiting, European Union countries and so on, including economic ministers, trade ministers, and so on. Do you think that's an over-practice of the so-called One China policy?
I think that the sheer existence of the European Economic and Trade Office in Taiwan shows that we are not on that line. What we want with Taiwan is to develop good relations in all areas, whether trade, cultural relations, relations in the area of research, higher education. So that's the basis of our policy towards China. Even though we have a one China policy, that does not prevent us from moving towards greater cooperation between the EU and Taiwan.
And speaking of use of force against Taiwan by China, how about the threat of using force against Taiwan? Is that something that is also posed by the EU countries?
As I said, we are opposed to the use of force. So that's definitely part and the core of our position. So we definitely monitor the situation across the Straits from a military point of view. But what we'd like to see is more cooperation, more dialogue across the Straits. We've been more active in the past years, I think, and it's visible for the people who are looking at the EU foreign policy and at the EU's policy towards China and Taiwan and the Asian region in general. We've been more active explaining our position, making our voice heard. Whenever something happens that we think might upset the balance, we will speak out as European Union with one voice. For example, when China adopted a so-called anti-secession law, we issued a statement, an EU statement, saying that we were not very happy about it. When there are, on the contrary, steps towards more cooperation and, for example, more direct flights between the two sides of the Strait, we also voice our satisfaction and encouragement and say that we think that's the best way to do things. So we've been more active and we've been reacting more often to what's been happening between the two sides.
Does the EU take any position on the so-called direct flights between Taiwan and China, or three links between the two sides?
Yeah, we've been saying very often now that we favor the development of these links, and we think that it's a good idea. It's the way to build the relation between the two people, and it's always also from a purely economic point of view a good idea, including from the point of view of the EU's own economic interests.
But as you know, that the political situation in between the two sides has been deadlock, and who do you think that should bear more responsibility for putting a political relation between the two sides in such a difficult situation?
You're asking a too difficult question, which I don't think anybody can answer.
Okay.
The responsibility rests on both sides. And since we've been talking about 50 years of history of the European Union, we also have to keep in mind that there are 50 years and more than 50 years of history of relations between the two sides of the Taiwan Strait. I think the history is there for everybody. We've got to take into account that history. And it's still there. The remains of history are still there between the two governments and between the Taiwan and China. Nobody can really go forward with thinking or taking into account the history.
You make a very good point by saying that the experience of EU integration is to make friends with your enemies or former enemies. Can we copy that, Taiwan or China can copy that from, your experiences?
It's for Taiwan and China to decide. definitely. But I think that there are inspirations to be taken in the EU experience, even though the situation is, by definition, very different from what it was in Europe in the 1950s. But the idea, the ideal of the EU is, I think, a possible inspiration.
Finally, let's talk about the future prospect of Taiwan-EU relationship. What are the primary objectives you are hoping to accomplish while you're here as the office here?
Right, thank you. I would like to see the relations in trade develop well enough so that Taiwan does not slip or does not go on slipping down the list of the trade partners for the EU. That's one. And that means more EU exports to Taiwan, I would say, as well as, fortunately, if possible, more Taiwanese exports to the EU, which are already quite high. That's one. And I would also like to make sure that the Taiwanese can benefit as much as possible from all the possibilities of cooperation that we have between the EU and Taiwan, and which are underexploited. We talked about foreign direct investment. I would like to see more Taiwanese investment in Europe. I would like to see more Taiwanese students studying in Europe, and the other way around. So that's my aim.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Lafranche. Thanks for coming to our program.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you for watching Taiwan Outlook. See you next week.